Hi, I'm Mary Passenger. I actually taught here at Eisenhower for almost 30 years, and it is my pleasure to read Charlie Bumpers versus the Teacher of the Year. Chapter 3. What a bozo. By the time we got home from shopping, I was mad at everyone and everything. I took my new clothes into my room and threw them on my bed. I pulled out the shoebox and opened the lid a crack, hoping that maybe the clerk had been wrong and had miraculously found a black pair in my size. Boogers! The shoes were still white. They were blindingly white, disgustingly white, horrible white. I hated those stupid sneakers. Maybe my old sneakers would be okay to wear. At least they weren't snow white anymore. I got down on the floor and searched under my bed. It took me a long time to find them because they were buried under all the stuff I'd cleaned out of my closet. But the moment I pulled them out, I realized that I couldn't wear them this year. These were the shoes that had made Mrs. Burke hate me in the first place. I stuffed them back under my bed. I pulled the new sneakers out of their box again and looked at them. They were the right kind, but the wrong color. And then it hit me. Why do they have to stay this color? One time my mom hadn't liked the color of a pair of her shoes, so she dyed them. Why couldn't I do that? I got my black marker and colored a little spot on the back of the heel of one of the sneakers. It looked pretty good. I colored a little more on the side. It still looked pretty good. Pretty soon half the sneaker was black. Now it didn't look so good. But there was no turning back. I had to color the whole shoe. Then my marker ran out. I looked all over the house and finally found another one in the jar on my mom's desk. When I'd colored in the top of the second sneaker, I realized that the new marker looked like a different shade of black, sort of like a really dark gray. Who knew that there were different colors of black? But I kept going until I had covered the entire shoe. I even colored the shoelaces, which took a long time. I didn't color the bottoms since they were already red. I put the shoes on, then I took them off. They didn't look like stupid white sneakers anymore. They looked like stupid black sneakers. What a bozo. Chapter 4. Maybe there was a mistake. I woke up on the first day of school feeling queasy. I'd been going to King Philip Elementary School forever, so I guess I shouldn't have been nervous about the first day anymore. But I was. Even though it was the same old school, things were different. Like knowing that I was going to have Mrs. Burke and not knowing who else was going to be in my class. When I got dressed and put on my new sneakers, I realized Mom wasn't going to like what I'd done. I hoped she wouldn't notice. Lucky for me, the first day of school was a big deal for my little sister, and she kept asking Mom for help getting ready. My brother and my dad left before I went down for breakfast. I thought I was safe. Then Mom noticed. "What on earth did you do to your sneakers?" she asked. Trick question? I knew there was no good answer. "I don't know," I said, which is a good thing to say when adults ask trick questions. "Oh, Charlie, why did you do that?" "I wanted black ones," I said. She shook her head and started clearing away the breakfast dishes. She was slamming things around a little, so I knew she was mad. On the bus, the squid wanted to sit with me. "Why don't you sit there and save a seat for Carla?" I said. "I'll be right here behind you in the next row sitting with Tommy. They get on in 2 stops. "Okay," she said, sliding into the seat in front of me. "I can't wait to see Mrs. Diaz." "You mean Diaz?" I corrected her. Mrs. Diaz had been my teacher in first grade, and now the squid was in her class. She looked at me like I was making a joke or something. "That's what I said, Diaz." I gave up and sat down. I couldn't wait to see Tommy. He and I had been best friends since second grade. He is excellent at many things. He draws great cartoons. He can make his voice sound just like a sports announcer. He does an hilarious duck imitation. He can turn his eyelids inside out, and it's really gross, and none of the grown-ups can stand it. But he also has a habit of blurting things out when it would be better to keep his mouth shut. Like the time he told my dad that we didn't mean to let the air out of the car tire. Tommy and his little sister Carla got on. "Hey Charlie, guess what?" "What?" "I know who I have for a teacher," he said. "Me too." I suddenly got a really sick feeling because something occurred to me. We'd always been in the same class. What if Tommy didn't have Mrs. Burke? "Who do you have?" he asked. "You first," I said. "I got Mrs. L. Did you?" I looked down at the floor. The engine roared and the bus bounced up and down. My stomach tied itself into a knot. I shook my head. "No? You didn't? Are you sure?" I nodded. Now, even worse, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't want to cry, so I looked out the window. "Who'd you get?" I gave Tommy a don't ask look. He slapped his hand over his mouth. He could tell just from the look on my face. Not Mrs. Burke," he said. I nodded again. Tommy shook his head. "I can't believe it." "Neither can I." "Maybe you can switch teachers." I already asked my mom, and she said that was ridiculous. I told her I was allergic to Mrs. Burke, but it didn't do any good. "Did you tell your mom what happened?" "No!" I said. "Do you think I'm crazy?" "Well, yes," he said. "That's why we're friends." That made me laugh, even though I knew I was going to die as soon as I got to school. Then Tommy looked down and saw my sneakers. "Wow. What happened to your shoes?" "I don't want to talk about it. All I can say is they didn't have the black ones like yours, so I made some adjustments." "Oh," Tommy said. Then he added, "They don't look that bad." "Thanks," I said, but I knew Tommy was just trying to make me feel better. That's what best friends are for. When you do something that makes you look like a bozo, they tell you it isn't that bad. Neither of us said anything for a minute. I wondered if you could still be best friends if you weren't in the same class. Then I thought maybe his mom would let him change to Mrs. Burke's class, even though then we'd both be miserable. But at least we'd be miserable together, which is a lot better than being miserable alone. "Maybe it'll be okay," Tommy said. "She was Teacher of the Year last year." "I think grown-ups gave that award," I said. "I know I didn't vote for her." "Neither did I," Tommy agreed. "But maybe she's forgotten what happened." "Yeah, right. No way." "I know," he said. "I was just trying to help. How could she possibly forget? I was so dead." "But it was sort of funny," Tommy said, "when you think about it." I thought about it. Mr. Romano was the best third-grade teacher. Every Friday afternoon at the end of the day, he would let us play games in class. Once, when Tommy and I were partners for Mystery Word, we had to go out in the hall while we waited for the class to decide on a secret word for us to figure out. It took them a long time to decide, and we started messing around. Tommy stepped on the back of my sneaker and pulled it off. Then he wouldn't give it back. I wrestled him to the floor and pulled off one of his sneakers. We were both laughing. Then he threw my shoe down the hall. I threw his shoe too. Just as I let go, a teacher came out of her classroom, and the sneaker hit her in the head. It was a complete accident. I would never hit a teacher in the head with a sneaker on purpose. Guess who the teacher was? Right, Mrs. Burke. She was pretty surprised. I can see how anyone who got hit in the head by a sneaker in the school hallway would be surprised. Sneakers don't usually fly down the hallways of schools. She was also pretty mad. She picked up the flying shoe. Then she saw my shoe that Tommy had thrown and picked it up too. She walked toward us. "Who threw this?" she growled, holding up Tommy's shoe. I guess she didn't ask about my shoe since it hadn't hit her in the head. "I did," I said. I wondered if she was going to beat me with Tommy's shoe. I threw the other one, Tommy confessed. He didn't have to say that. It sure didn't help things much, because then she said the words I'll never forget. If I ever see you throw another shoe in school, you will stay in from recess for the rest of your life. The rest of your life is a very long time, especially if you're 8 years old, which I was at the time. If you lived to be 100, that would be 92 years without recess. Then Mr. Romano came out of the classroom, and Mrs. Burke told him what had happened. And he took our shoes and gave them back to us and told us to sit down. We didn't get to play mystery word anymore. Mr. Romano didn't say a word to us. That's how he usually was when he got mad. Sometimes when adults don't say anything, it's worse than when they yell. It was a bad day. But I learned an important lesson that afternoon. Never, ever hit a teacher in the head with a sneaker, especially the teacher of the year. Well, it isn't funny to me, I told Tommy. Now I have Mrs. Burke for a teacher. Carla and the squid and Tommy and I got off the bus together at school and walked in through the front door. Mrs. Rotelli, the principal, and Mrs. Finch, the school secretary, were greeting everyone and telling them where to find their classrooms. I already knew where mine was, Mrs. Burke's prison. There was also a lady to show the first graders to their classes. She took Carla and the squid by their hands and led them down the hall. Hi, Mrs. Rotelli, Tommy blurted out. I think maybe there was a mistake. Charlie and I have always been in the same class together, and I'm pretty sure he couldn't have Mrs. Burke. Can you check and see? Mrs. Rotelli stared at him for a second, then looked down at the clipboard. He does have Mrs. Burke. Is there some reason he shouldn't? Tommy glanced over at me. I rolled my eyes. Why couldn't he keep his mouth shut? No, he said. Then I hope you have a good school year. Both of you boys can head to your classrooms. End of chapter 4.